This video will be on the skull. So the skull contains 22 bones, and this is not counting the middle ear bones. And the skull rests on the superior end of the vertebral column. The bones of the skull are grouped into two categories. You have the cranial bones and the facial bones. Cranial bones and facial bones. So these are going to be the two categories of the skull bones. So the cranial bones form the cranial cavity, which encloses and protects the brain. And there are 8 cranial bones. So we have the frontal bone, we have 2 parietal bones, we have 2 temporal bones, the occipital bone, the sphenoid bone, and then also the ethmoid bone. And then the facial bones make up the facial structure. So the 14 facial bones that make up the face are going to be the 2 nasal bones. There are 2 maxillae, and when we say 2 maxillae, it's actually going to be split right down here. So we have this whole side, which is 1 maxillae, and then the whole side is a 2nd maxillae on the other side. We also have 2 zygomatic bones, 1 on either side. We have the mandible, or the lower jawbone. There are 2 lacrimal bones, 2 palatine bones, 2 inferior nasal conchae, which are here, and also the vomer. So those are going to be the facial bones. The frontal bone, which is right here at the top, this forms the forehead, which is the anterior part of the cranium. And the roofs of the orbits, you can see here, roof the orbits, and then it also forms most of the anterior part of the cranial floor. So the frontal bone kind of forms all those areas, as you can see, because it's in blue here. The 2 parietal bones, you can see right here, and kind of like the pink, they form the greater portion of the sides and the roof of the cranial cavity. And the internal surfaces of the parietal bones contain many protrusions and depressions that accommodate blood vessels supplying the dura mater, which is the superficial connective tissue covering the brain. So here you can kind of see an interior view of the cranial bones. And the paired temporal bones here in purple, they form the inferior and lateral aspects of the cranium and also part of the cranial floor. The temporal squama is a thin, flat part of the temporal bone that forms the anterior and superior part of the temple. And the temple is the region of the cranium around the ear. Protecting from the inferior portion of the temporal squama is the zygomatic process. Can't see it very well on this picture, but on the exterior picture you can. And this, the zygomatic process articulates with the temporal process of the zygomatic or cheekbone. So zygomatic usually means about cheek. The occipital bone, occiput, I'll quickly do this too. Occiput directly means back of head. So we know that that bone is going to be found on the back of the head, and here it is, the occipital bone, that large orange bone colored at the back of the head. This one forms the posterior part and most of the base of the cranium. The foramen magnum, and foramen magnum, remember, just directly means large hole. This is in the inferior part of the occipital bone. The medulla oblongata is the inferior part of the brain, and this connects with the spinal cord within this foramen. And the vertebral and spinal arteries also pass through it along the accessory nerve. So all those things go through the foramen magnum. The occipital condyles, you can see them right here, these little sticky out bits from the occipital bone. These are oval processes with convex surfaces on either side of the foramen magnum. You can see them here, one is here and one is here. And these articulate with depressions on the first cervical vertebrae. And the first cervical vertebrae, which is C1, is also called atlas. And we'll go over these cervical vertebrae yet too. But these little condyles, the occipital condyles, articulate with atlas, which is the first vertebrae. And this articulation with the occipital condyles and C1 actually form the atlanto-occipital joint. And this joint actually allows you to nod your head up and down or in like a fashion that you're saying yes. So it's kind of like the yes joint, the atlanto-occipital joint. So it allows you to nod your head yes. The external occipital protuberances, so you can see those here at the bottom. This is the most predominant midline projection on the posterior surface of the bone, and it's just above the foramen magnum. You can see it right here. You may actually be able to feel this structure as a bump on the back of your head, just above your neck. A large fibrous elastic ligament, the ligamentum nuchae, extends from the external occipital protuberance to the 7th cervical vertebrae, and this helps to support your head. So we have this ligamentum nuchae. Put that actually right here. And the word nuchae actually means nape of the neck. And this is the ligament that attaches to, or from actually the external occipital protuberance to the 7th cervical vertebrae, or C7. And this helps to support the head. Okay, extending laterally from this protuberance are two curved ridges. They are going to be the superior nuchal lines, and then below these are going to be the inferior nuchal lines. And these are areas of muscle attachment. So remember that any roughened surface on bone or protuberances, these are usually going to be areas of muscle attachment. The sphenoid bone, you can see it here in green. Sphenoid means wedge-shaped. Because it looks kind of like a wedge. This lies in the middle part of the base of the skull. This bone is actually well known as the keystone of the cranial floor. And this is because it articulates with all other cranial bones, pretty much holding them all together. Because you can see here, it articulates with the frontal bone in the front, and actually the ethmoid bone, actually at the very top there. And then it articulates with the purple temporal bone and the pink parietal bone as well, a little bit right here. And then also with the occipital bone at the back too. So the sphenoid bone actually articulates with every other bone of the cranium. Okay, the shape of this sphenoid bone actually kind of resembles a butterfly. I don't know if you can kind of see this. It has outstretched wings with a body kind of here with this medial portion. And then we have these greater wings at the top, and then lesser wings down here. These are actually labeled greater wing, and then the lesser wing as well. They're labeled. So they're actually labeled kind of like a butterfly. So you have the body of the sphenoid bone, and then the greater wings and the lesser wings. Okay, so we're going to erase that. Okay, another foramen that's associated with the sphenoid bone is the foramen rotundum. It's actually going to be right here. Rotundum means round hole. And this is located at the junction of the anterior and medial parts of the sphenoid bone. This is a foramen that the maxillary branch of the trigeminal nerve actually passes through. So the trigeminal nerve is the fifth cranial nerve. We will go over all the nerves yet too, but you can know that the foramen rotundum is where the maxillary branch of the trigeminal nerve actually goes through there. And that will be the end of Chapter 7, Part 3.